Ayn Rand and the Tea Party, well, they apparently don't mix. At least not in Minnesota. I'm Alan Barton. Stand by for Front Page.
In America, religion is a private matter and must not be brought into political issues. Intellectually, to rest one's case on faith is to concede that reason is on the side of one's enemies, to concede that there are no rational arguments to support the ideas which created this country.
All right, the Minnesota Objectivist Association was recently admitted to a Minnesota Tea Party organization, but then forced to withdraw due to alleged irreconcilable differences between the Tea Party and Ayn Rand's philosophy, specifically on the issue of religion and the idea of faith versus reason. Joining me in studio is Don Watkins, analyst at the Ayn Rand Center for Individual Rights, and Terry Jones, associate editor for Investors Business Daily. Don, we'll start with you. What's going on here in Minnesota, and what issues do you think it brings up?
Well, most of the Tea Parties have been seen as a coalition of people of all divergent views, but who agree on one thing. We need to move in the direction of economic freedom and not continue in this direction of growing government. But this particular Tea Party organization, as a few others, has a very strong religious right streak to it, and that conflicts with Ayn Rand's view, which is that she was an atheist, and she believed that economic freedom rested on a base of reason, not religion. Now, so there's a real issue of, can these groups work together on these narrow issues? But in most places in the United States, it hasn't been a problem.
So there are other areas of the country where Ayn Rand's organizations or objectivist organizations have been part of the Tea Party in some area. This is sort of an unusual thing that the reason-faith divide has sort of said, like, we don't want people whose belief in reason excludes faith, which I think some would say Ayn Rand's philosophy does.
Well, it's been interesting. There's been a handful of cases where particular people won't let objectivists come and speak. But in general, Ayn Rand has been a very big presence at the Tea Parties precisely because even a lot of religious Tea Party participants say that is not what the Tea Party is about. The Tea Party is not about debating religion. It's not about debating abortion. It's about economic freedom. And therefore, by and large, they've been very open to Ayn Rand's ideas.
Terry, broadening out a little bit beyond just the objectivists and the Tea Party, there's an interesting, this brings up faith in politics, religion in politics, and whether they can mix, how you frame that discussion. What do you see as the large implications of something like this in Minnesota?
Well, Walter Hudson on the PJ Media site blogged about this, and it was a great blog. He made an interesting distinction. There's a difference between separation of church and state, which I think most religious people, and I myself am a believer, I think I've said that in the past, there's a big difference between...
A believer as in you're a religious person, not a believer, not just a believer in the separation of church and state.
I am a believer in the separation of church and state, but I am also a practicing Catholic. But there's a difference between separating church and state and separating religion and politics. And a person who is religious can no more separate his religious beliefs from his political beliefs than you can any other thing in your life. I mean, it's not that easily compartmentalized. And I would say, in addressing Ayn Rand's comment about reason, religious people believe that reason is a God-given attribute, and that reason is a good thing.
Yeah.
And that is the basis of our Constitution. We have no disagreement with her there.
Yeah. All right, why don't we see what Newt Gingrich had to say about this issue several weeks ago at one of the 7,343 Republican debates that have happened so far.
I think if the question is, does faith matter? Absolutely. How can you have a country which is founded on truths, which begins, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights? I think all of us would also agree that there's a very central part of your faith in how you approach public life. And I, frankly, would be really worried if somebody assured me that nothing in their faith would affect their judgments, because then I'd wonder, where's your judgment? How can you have judgment if you have no faith? And how can I trust you with power if you don't pray?
Don, what are your thoughts on on his thoughts there. I mean, obviously, Ayn Rand was an atheist, but she was someone who I think respected Christianity. And in the same blog that Terry alludes to, she alludes to Miss Rand's view that Christ was sort of the first guy to say you could love your neighbor, but not necessarily more than you love yourself, and was one that was based on your own well-being versus that of the collective. So she was cognizant of a value to religion. I think she was just trying to emphasize what in her...
Well, I mean, it's a complex issue, but fundamentally she was opposed to religion. She was opposed to any form of faith and any form of the idea that we owe allegiance or duty to something other than making the most of our own lives. Now, in terms of what does the separation of church and state really mean, and how should one think about it? Well, certainly the idea that a president should have to pray, I think, is insane. It has nothing to do with Americanism. But the idea really finds its roots and best expression actually in John Locke. And John Locke makes a clear argument that to separate church and state, you have to know what is the proper function of the state. And when you have a defined proper function of protecting individual rights, which both he and Ayn Rand and the Founding Fathers agreed with, well, then you can have that separation because it's people are free to believe whatever they want, they're free to do whatever they want, but they can't violate other people's rights. And so the government doesn't take cognizance of religion because it doesn't take cognizance of anybody's ideas. It protects individual rights.
People misunderstand the First Amendment anyway. Church and state aren't even mentioned in the First Amendment. It just shall, you say, I know you know it word for word. But
yeah, well, it says Congress shall make no law regarding religion or the establishment.
Nor the prohibition thereof.
That's right.
So what do you think in terms of what Mr. Gingrich is saying regarding, like, he would consider it of value that you know that the president has a background, I'm not sure he's saying religious, but one of like philosophy. Yeah. That's what I would say is the sort of the next sort of tough line to cross. Like, when is it philosophy? When is it religion? You want your leaders to have a philosophy from which they are making a basis for their decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't necessarily need it to be that of Jesus Christ or of Buddha or of whomever they want to believe in.
Yeah, I would say, if I'm going to vote for a president, I want a president who has a philosophy and who believes in something that I can identify and has a moral center to him. But that said, that doesn't mean that they have to be a Catholic or a Lutheran or a Buddhist, or they'd have to be any religion at all. I think it's a little absurd to say that anybody who's elected to public office has to be religious or pray.
And I'm not sure that's what he's saying. I mean, I think he just wants them to have a philosophical basis and underpinning.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, but he's going to say that, but I'm not sure he actually literally means it. Yeah. But I don't know.
I'm not sure he actually prays, quite frankly.
I mean, I'm not sure a lot of them play. I'm not sure. Obama doesn't come across to me as a religious man, but he still says, and God bless America, and makes the noises about going to church or not. Anyway, I think it's a fascinating issue. We could go on for 7 hours, and we will not. Thank you, gentlemen. Viewers, if you'd like to see more articles on this one, visit pjmedia.com. For Don and Terry, I'm Alan Barton. You've been watching Front Page.